Maybe you should update your resume before security has to escort you out. That is what Dr. Caldwell said 43 minutes before Elena Martinez would save a man's life with her bare hands while bleeding from 2 stab wounds. The fluorescent lights of Seattle General hum over sterile corridors smelling of antiseptic and floor wax. Elena moves through the surgical recovery wing at 11:56 p.m., her hand steady as she adjusts for drips and checks monitors. The ventilator in room for 12 wheezed its mechanical rhythm. She wore long sleeves despite the warmth, hiding puckered scars on her forearms, old wounds from when she was someone else, before the Navy ordered her to disappear. In her locker rested a tarnished challenge coin, worn smooth from 7 years of nervous handling. She would not think about that coin tonight. She could not afford to. Dr. Caldwell found her at the vending machine on the 2nd floor. His timing was deliberate, no witnesses, just the fluorescent buzz and the quiet hiss of the ice maker. He wore his white coat like armor and carried the certainty of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. "Your technique is exhausting to watch," he said. Elena did not turn around. The vending machine dispensed her herbal tea with a mechanical clunk. She retrieved it, the paper cup warm against her palms. 8 minutes per patient. 8. The standard is 4. Caldwell's voice carried the practiced cruelty of a man accustomed to having an audience, even when there was none. "You check monitors 3 times. You document everything. You're killing our efficiency metrics." She turned to face him then. Her jaw remained unlocked. Her breathing remained level. She had learned long ago that composure in the face of contempt was its own kind of weapon. "I'll adjust my pace, doctor," she said quietly. "No, you won't. You can't. It's written into your DNA, this obsessive, outdated thoroughness." He smiled, and the smile was the worst part. It was genuine. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to update your resume. You're going to do it tonight. And tomorrow morning, you're going to resign before security has to escort you out. Do you understand?" Elena held his gaze for 3 seconds. Long enough. Not so long that it could be called a challenge. She had spent 18 years learning the exact mathematics of submission without breaking. "I understand, doctor," she said. He nodded, satisfied by her compliance, and walked away. The elevator doors opened and closed behind him with a soft pneumatic sigh. Elena remained at the vending machine. The tea in her hand had stopped steaming. She set it down on the counter and did not pick it up again. Later, she would forget she had even ordered it. The Green Beret General occupied room 504, post-op cardiac surgery, 72 hours stable. His chart read, "Decorated officer, emergency cab, excellent prognosis pending continued monitoring." His name was classified on every document Elena touched. She only knew him as patient 504, though the tattoo on his left forearm told her everything. Martinez. Beneath it, a date, the 22nd of August, 2017. She had been carrying him through a minefield in Helm and Province on that date. His left shoulder bleeding from a round that had missed his spine by the width of a stethoscope. His consciousness flickering in and out with the morphine she'd injected. 2 privates trailing behind them, both worse off than he was, and 200 meters of open ground between their position and the extraction zone. She remembered the weight of him. The heat radiating off the desert at dawn. The smell of copper and gunpowder and something else, fear, maybe. Or determination. They smelled the same after a while. His eyes opened when she checked his for at 12:34 a.m. The morphine had softened him into something nearly peaceful. He studied her face for a moment, and she watched his pupils track across her features with the slow deliberation of a man who could not quite assemble the pieces of recognition. His forearm lay across his abdomen, the tattoo visible in the monitor's blue glow. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough from the breathing tube they'd removed that morning. "Your nurse," she said. She adjusted the drip, though it needed no adjustment. Her hands moved with the same mechanical precision that had infuriated Dr. Caldwell. Thorough. Predictable. Invisible. "You look like..." He trailed off, his eyes drifting closed again. Never mind. Elena continued her rounds. Room 505. Room 506. The cardiac monitors bleeped their steady rhythm like a chorus of distant hearts. The challenge coin in her locker seemed heavier tonight, though she had not touched it and would not touch it. Dr. Caldwell's motivation was simple mathematics, the kind that required no moral accounting. His kickback arrangement with Meridian Medical Devices had been running for 14 months, $40,000 monthly, deposited into an account registered to a shell corporation in Delaware. The scheme was elegant: inflate surgical supply orders by 20%, pocket the difference through falsified billing codes, and distribute the overstock to a secondary market that asked no questions. The problem was Elena's charts. She documented everything. Every bag. Every catheter. Every sponge count. Every fluid line and every pressure reading. When she audited her own work, she cross-referenced it against the supply orders, a habit born from years of military inventory management. A habit that had nothing to do with hospital protocol and everything to do with the part of her that could not stop seeing patterns in disorder. In the past 6 weeks, she had flagged 17 discrepancies in the cardiac wing's supply utilization. 17 small inconsistencies that, when examined together, formed a shape. A shape that looked like theft. She had not reported them. She had not even mentioned them to Dr. Caldwell. She had simply documented them, as she documented everything, with the kind of obsessive thoroughness that belonged in operating rooms and combat zones, not in the fluorescent quiet of a hospital that wanted her gone. Caldwell knew about the discrepancies because his partner at Meridian had sent him a message at 10:17 p.m. "Your nurse is asking questions about the August supply orders. We need to address this." They were not actually questions. Elena had asked nothing. But her charts had spoken, and Caldwell understood the language of threat when he read it. Which is why he had found her at the vending machine. Which is why he had offered her a choice that was not a choice. She could resign, or she could be terminated for incompetence. Either way, the pattern would stop. The inconsistencies would end. And Caldwell would move forward with his $1,400 a week, which was enough to pay for his daughter's private school tuition and his wife's horse and the insurance on his boat, which was named, with the kind of irony only the guilty could appreciate, clean slate. Elena returned to the surgical wing at 1:23 a.m. to perform the 4-hour post-op monitoring rounds. Room 504's monitor showed a steady sinus rhythm, the general's breathing deep and even beneath the soft hiss of the oxygen cannula. She checked his labs, white blood cell count elevated slightly but acceptable, potassium at 4.2, troponin trending down. She marked each result in his chart with the same meticulous attention she had given every patient for the past 18 years. Thorough. Obsessive. Exactly as Caldwell had described it. The challenge coin sat in her locker, pressed against the metal door like a secret. It was made from aircraft wreckage and shrapnel, forged in a fire that had taken 3 Marines and permanently erased Master Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez from every official record. She had pressed it into the general's hand 7 years ago in Marja when she thought he was not going to survive. A soldier's gesture. A farewell. He had survived. And now he was sleeping 2 doors down the hall, his forearm bearing a tattoo that proved he had survived, though he could not remember why she was the one who had kept him alive. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The ventilators wheezed. The monitors bleeped their silent chorus. And in room 504, a decorated officer slept with a name written on his arm in fading ink, the letters spelling out a woman who no longer existed anywhere except in her own meticulous documentation. Elena finished her rounds at 2:19 a.m. She returned to the break room, poured herself a cup of coffee that she did not want, and sat in the dark with the door closed. On the table lay her resignation letter, already printed, already signed. All she had to do was place it on her supervisor's desk before the morning shift arrived. All she had to do was disappear again. But that was not what happened next. That was not what happened at all. The grand rounds began at 7 in the morning, before most of the hospital had caffeine in their bloodstreams. Elena pushed the medication cart through the third-floor corridor, its wheels squeaking against linoleum that never quite stayed clean despite the housekeeping staff's relentless efforts. Dr. Caldwell emerged from room 312 mid-stride, his white coat flaring like a cape as he gathered the cluster of residents around him, 5 eager faces in their short coats, pens ready, eyes sharper than they had any right to be at this hour. He stopped directly in front of Elena's cart. "Class," Caldwell announced, his voice calibrated to carry without quite shouting. "Observe Nurse Martinez here." A perfect demonstration of outdated nursing protocols that cost this hospital thousands in wasted labor hours every single month. Elena's hand stilled on the 4 bag she was replacing. She did not look up. Caldwell continued, gesturing as though Elena were a museum exhibit. "Notice her approach. She performs vitals checks every 90 minutes instead of the efficient 2-hour standard our monitors recommend. She hand charts redundant observations that our EHR system has already captured automatically. She's thorough, yes. Thoroughly inefficient." One of the residents, a young man with the kind of haircut that cost $70, let out a sound that might have been a smirk or might have been a cough. "Dinosaur nursing," someone whispered, loud enough to be heard. Elena's jaw tightened. Imperceptibly. Just a small muscle contraction near her temple that lasted perhaps 0.2 of a second. Her hands never stopped moving. The 4 bag came free with a soft liquid whisper, fresh tubing connected with practiced precision, the drip rate adjusted without hesitation. She made no eye contact. Offered no defense. The silence was the kind that comes from absolute composure, not the silence of fear or shame, but the silence of someone who had long ago learned that reactions were luxuries she could not afford. Caldwell watched for something, a flinch, a defensive word, a crack in her composure. Finding nothing, he seemed almost disappointed as he led his residents away, their voices fading down the hallway like water draining from a sink. Elena continued her rounds with the same steady rhythm she maintained every shift. Room 312, post-surgical hip replacement, vital stable, pain management adequate. Room 314, acute pneumonia, oxygen saturation holding at 93% on 2 liters. Room 316, the general, still hazed on morphine, his faded tattoo visible on his left forearm where it read Martinez in block letters beneath the date, March 17, 2017, though his eyes registered nothing when she checked his for access and noted his rhythm was steady, his breathing uncompromised. An hour later, Elena stood at the 4th floor vending machine, fishing quarters from her scrub's pocket. The fluorescent light above the machine buzzed with the particular electricity of tired equipment about to fail. She needed coffee that wasn't the brownish liquid the break room provided, something with actual flavor, something that tasted like it had been made in this decade. Caldwell appeared beside her as though summoned by her moment of relative solitude. "Still here, Nurse Martinez." His voice was conversational, the way a snake's movement is conversational, smooth and purposeful. "I'm surprised. Most people recognize when they've become a liability." Elena selected her coffee without responding. Her knuckles did not whiten around the cup. Her breathing did not accelerate. She simply stood there, holding the warmth of the cup in her palms, waiting for him to finish. "You know," Caldwell continued, selecting a protein bar from the shelf with the casual arrogance of someone who had never been told no in any meaningful way, "there are excellent early retirement programs for nurses who can't keep pace with modern medicine. Before management makes that decision for you." He turned to face her fully. "Before security has to make it." Elena walked away. She did not run. Did not hurry. Her posture remained perfect as she turned toward the stairwell, the posture of someone trained to carry wounded soldiers 3 miles through minefield terrain and still have steadiness left to spare. The door to the stairwell closed behind her with a soft pneumatic hiss. Only then, gripping the cold metal railing in the darkness of the landing, did her hands shake. But there was no one to see it. That was the point. The next morning, Elena stood at the nursing station charting her 12-hour overnight shift, documenting vital signs, medication administration times, fluid intake and output ratios. The computer hummed beneath her fingers as she typed with the mechanical precision of someone for whom attention to detail was not a personality trait but a survival mechanism. She was 3 lines into her documentation when Caldwell appeared on the other side of the desk, his presence announced by the sharp scent of expensive cologne and something else, something sour underneath, like fear masked as confidence. Nurse Martinez. Not a greeting. A summons. When you have a moment, and I know you have plenty of those, given how slowly you work, please see me about your charting errors. We need to discuss whether you're still capable of meeting Seattle General standards. For colleagues at nearby stations pretended not to listen. The pretense was generous. Everyone listened. Elena's face remained absolutely neutral. She nodded once, a single movement of acknowledgement, turned back to her computer, and continued documenting with mechanical precision. Her fingers moved across the keyboard as though he were not standing there watching for any crack, any reaction, any moment of vulnerability he could exploit. There was none. She had learned long ago that composure was armor, and she had learned to wear it the way other people wore skin. Caldwell waited perhaps 10 seconds longer, hoping for something he would never receive, then walked away. But that was not what happened next. That was not what happened at all. 3 weeks later, Elena sat in the supply chain office with a printout in front of her, flagged requisition forms that did not match completed procedures. Serial numbers that appeared across multiple surgical dates despite being logged as used. Equipment billed to Seattle General that never entered sterilization protocols. The patterns had emerged slowly, then all at once, the way a photograph develops in chemical baths, first nothing, then shadows, then a complete image that could not be unseen. She had made a note. Flagged 2 entries for the supply chain manager to review. Thought nothing more of it. Documentation was her job. Accuracy was not negotiable. The rest was not her concern. At 2:16 p.m. that same afternoon, Caldwell received an automated email notification about supply audit triggers. His fingers went very still on his keyboard. He pulled up the flags, 17 of them, all originating from Elena's station logs, all pointing toward the same impossible conclusion, his $40,000 monthly kickback scheme, the ghost billings for equipment that existed only on paper, the distributor contact who had been depositing money into an offshore account for 3 years, all of it was about to collapse. One meticulous nurse was about to bury him. He made a phone call. That evening, Seattle General admitted a refugee patient from the resettlement program, a man named Rashid, formerly Taliban, now an asylum case with acute appendicitis and a collection of trauma responses that no medication could quite suppress. Elena noticed him during her evening rounds on the surgical floor. His agitation was visible in the way his fingers moved against his thighs, the way his eyes tracked military insignia on a visiting officer's uniform, the way his Pashto mutterings formed patterns that suggested neither sleep nor true wakefulness. She mentioned her concern to the charge nurse, who dismissed it. The patient was sedated, restrained per protocol, scheduled for surgery in the morning. Elena documented her observation anyway, something about his pupils, his respiratory pattern, the particular quality of his anxiety that suggested his nervous system was still running combat calculations. She noted it, documented it, and continued her shift. At 9:11 p.m., she passed the general's room. The door was slightly ajar. Protocol required it closed. Infection control. She approached to secure it, and what she saw made her entire nervous system shift into a frequency she had not inhabited since 2017. The refugee patient stood over the general's bed, a surgical scalpel gripped in white-knuckled fist, screaming in Pashto about American devils and Marja and the names of people who were no longer alive to answer. The general was barely conscious. Still weak from surgery. Still morphine-hazed enough that he could not move with anything resembling speed. Elena did not think. Thinking would have cost her something, a second, a heartbeat, a margin of error. She stepped between them. 3 weeks into the post-surgical rotation, Elena's hand stopped moving at precisely the moment her eyes caught something they weren't supposed to see. A requisition form. Caldwell's signature at the bottom. The numbers didn't match the inventory logs from the previous week, 14 cases of titanium spinal hardware ordered when only 3 had been implanted, 40 units of a cardiac monitoring system that the hospital's own procurement records showed they didn't use. She stood in the supply room at 11:16 p.m., holding the form, her jaw working silently. Pain is data, her old instructors used to say. This was the same thing. A pattern emerging like a target on a map. She photographed the document with her phone, the flash-off, the motion economical. 1 photo. 2. 3. Then she returned everything exactly as she'd found it and went back to her rounds, her face giving away nothing. The discrepancies multiplied over the next 12 days. Elena catalogued them in a personal notebook she kept in her car, dates, quantities, the names of surgical representatives who signed off on deliveries that didn't match actual usage. A $40,000 monthly pattern if her arithmetic was correct. Caldwell was siphoning hospital money through a medical device distributor, skimming the difference. The kind of scheme that took years to perfect, the kind that assumed no one was watching closely enough. But Elena had been trained to notice what others missed. To see the gaps. To understand that precision in small things revealed the architecture of larger corruptions. She wasn't building a case. She wasn't an investigator anymore. She was just a nurse who charted carefully, who noticed inventory discrepancies the way a sniper notices windage. Just doing her job. Just seeing. What she didn't know was that Caldwell's systems had already registered her access to those supply room files. Not because he was watching her. Because he was terrified enough to monitor everything. A 72-hour alert on his encrypted tablet, Elena Martinez, 11:22 p.m., supply documentation review. His hands had gone cold when he read it. 3 years he'd been running this. 3 years of careful diversions, fake purchase orders, shell companies in Monterrey. 3 years of nobody asking questions. And now a nurse, a nobody nurse with steady hands and a gift for detailed charting, was looking at the exact documents that would bury him. He'd made 3 phone calls before midnight. Board members. The nursing director. A lawyer in his contact list labeled simply clean. By morning, the machinery was already turning. He just needed to buy time. He just needed Elena gone. The patient arrived at 7:14 p.m. on a Tuesday evening, admitted through the ER with a designation that made everyone move carefully. Asylum seeker. Former detainee. Taliban affiliated, the intake paperwork noted with clinical distance, though what it really meant was, this man had been someone's enemy. His name was Rashid. His paperwork said he'd spent 18 months at a facility he wouldn't name. His chart noted significant PTSD, acute anxiety disorder, history of self-harm, and a psychiatric evaluation that used the phrase, ongoing cognitive disturbance. He'd been admitted for a perforated ulcer, surgery completed, recovery proceeding normally by every medical metric. But normal metrics don't account for the way trauma lives in a person's nervous system like a second heartbeat. Elena's first interaction with him came at 8:02 p.m. when she checked his post-surgical vitals. His eyes moved the way eyes move when the person behind them has learned to see threats in shadows. He watched her hands. Watched the fall line. Watched the monitor. She didn't make sudden movements. She didn't speak unnecessarily. She was efficient and quiet, which seemed to settle something in his chest. Pain level, she asked, her voice low and even. He held up her fingers. She adjusted his medication without comment. By 9:15 p.m., his vitals were stable, his breathing steady, and he was sleeping. She left him that way, documenting her observations with the meticulous precision that Dr. Caldwell found so tedious. Vitals stable. Pain controlled. Patient resting. She had no way of knowing what was waiting in the hours between midnight and dawn. The hospital ran on a night shift skeleton crew. 14 beds in the post-surgical wing. 2 nurses covering 36 patients across 2 floors. Elena was one of them, moving through the darkness with the rhythmic competence of someone who'd learned to work in spaces where mistakes were measured in body bags. She was checking the saline drip on bed 7 at 2:37 a.m. when she heard the crash from 2 rooms down. Not a catastrophic sound. Not immediately alarming. But wrong. A sound that meant something had changed. She moved toward it the way she'd been trained, quickly but not panicked, assessment before action. She found Rashid standing at the foot of his bed, his surgical gown hanging from one shoulder, his eyes fixed on something only he could see. The night table was on the floor. His full line dangled from his arm, still connected, bleeding slowly into the air. "Rashid," she said, keeping her voice flat and calm. "You're safe. You're at Seattle General Hospital in San Diego." He didn't respond. His breathing was rapid, shallow, hyperventilation accelerating toward panic. His hands were trembling. She recognized the signs because she'd seen them before, in different uniforms, in different wars. Acute dissociation. The brain protecting itself by disconnecting from the present. She stepped into his line of sight slowly, deliberately, making sure he could track her movements. "I need you to sit down," she said. Not a request. The tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed. But his eyes weren't tracking her anymore. They were moving past her, toward something beyond the hospital wall. Toward Marja. Toward whatever facility his paperwork refused to name. His hand shot out suddenly, violent and desperate, reaching for the nearest object. The crash cart was 3 feet away. Stainless steel. Medical supplies. And surgical instruments. The scalpel was in his fist before Elena could process the movement. He wasn't lunging at her with tactical precision. He was thrashing like someone drowning in air, his eyes still unseeing, his words coming in Pashto, a stream of syllables that her own neural pathways recognized as prayer mixed with profanity, desperation mixed with rage. He was screaming about American devils. About fire. About bodies. About a cage. Elena moved toward him instead of away, which was always the wrong instinct for the untrained, always the right one for the trained. Her left shoulder dropped. Her right arm came up to shield the general in the bed behind her, the older man who was starting to stir, morphine-hazed but aware enough to recognize danger. The scalpel came down in an arc that began at Rashid's shoulder and ended at Elena's arm. The pain was bright. Immediate. A line of heat that opened her left shoulder from collarbone to deltoid. Her vision sharpened instead of dimming, adrenaline and training overriding shock. She pivoted into his center line, using his own momentum against him, redirecting the energy of his next strike. He was faster than he looked, pain-driven and desperate, the blade coming at her ribs now, and she felt it slice beneath her left breast, felt it open her skin and the muscle beneath. Blood bloomed across her scrubs like a flower opening. She didn't process it as injury. She processed it as a tactical problem. 2 wounds. She had maybe 90 seconds before she'd start experiencing real blood loss complications. That was acceptable. The problem in front of her was more immediate. She drove her elbow forward and down into his solar plexus with controlled force, not maximum power, just enough to collapse his diaphragm and steal his breath. He folded. His grip on the scalpel loosened. She rotated his wrist with her right hand, breaking his grip without breaking bone, the blade falling harmlessly to the floor. 8 seconds. That's all it took. She had him face down on the tile, her knee braced between his shoulder blades, her hands controlling his wrists. For tubing. Zip ties. Both at hand. She secured his wrists in 4 seconds, her breathing controlled, her movements economical. Muscle memory. That's what the old instructors called it. The body remembering what the mind was pretending to forget. Then the monitors started screaming. Not Rashid's. The general's. His heart monitor shrieked an arrhythmia, a wild erratic pattern that meant pressure was building inside his chest, around his heart, squeezing it like a fist. Cardiac tamponade. The stress of the attack had triggered exactly what his body couldn't handle. Elena's tunnel vision narrowed further. Rashid was subdued. That problem was solved. This problem was lethal and had maybe 4 minutes before it became permanent. She moved to the crash cart without standing, without breaking her brace on Rashid's spine, and with her left shoulder screaming and her rib soaked with blood that was moving from hot to cold as her body began compensating, she grabbed what she needed. Pericardiocentesis needle. 18 gauge. She prepped the site, beneath the general's xiphoid process, the angle toward his left shoulder the way she'd learned it 7 years ago in a field hospital that didn't exist on any official map. Her right hand positioned the needle. Her left hand, bleeding, shaking with nothing but adrenaline and will, applied pressure to her own shoulder wound. 1 breath. 2. She advanced the needle, watching the monitor, feeling for the subtle change in resistance that meant she'd breached the pericardial sac. Dark blood filled the syringe. 15 milliliters. 20. The general's pressure stabilized. The monitor's screaming stopped. Sinus rhythm. The words appeared on the screen like a miracle written in numbers. She sat back against the wall, both hands now pressed to her own wounds, breathing through her nose, her composure intact, her hand steady. That's when the footsteps came. Boots on tile. Hard and authoritative. Security. And Dr. Caldwell, his face already arranging itself into expressions that would serve him well, concern, professionalism, the mask of a doctor who'd just arrived to find chaos and performed his duty. But his eyes told a different story. His eyes looked at Elena, sitting against the wall in blood, both her wounds visible, her military bearing unmistakable, even slumped against cold tile, and calculated. He was already planning. Already seeing how this moment could serve his purposes. A violent patient. An unstable nurse. A woman with episodes. The machinery was still turning. It just had different teeth now. The scalpel came without warning. One moment Elena was checking the generals for line, the next a man in hospital scrubs, hollow-eyed, trembling, his chart stamped with psychiatric consult, stumbled through the door screaming in Pashto. American devils. Death to infidels. His voice cracked like breaking glass. The blade caught fluorescent light as his arm came up, and Elena moved without thinking, without hesitation, her body simply recognizing the threat pattern her mind had trained away for 7 years. She stepped between the general and the attacker. Just stepped there, solid and immovable, as if she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment to arrive. The first strike came fast. The scalpel found her left shoulder, tore through scrub fabric and skin with a sensation like fire spreading through ice water. Pain is information, she thought distantly, that old military mantra, and the information was clear: arterial distance, depth of cut, 30 seconds before significant blood loss. She didn't flinch. Didn't make a sound. Her hand moved on its own, muscle memory taking over, reaching for the attacker's wrist with the precision of someone who'd trained in combat medicine for 18 years. The general tried to rise from his bed, morphine slow and desperate, and the attacker pivoted toward him with the blade raised. Elena couldn't allow that. The second strike came as she pulled the man toward her, turning his momentum against him, and the scalpel entered her ribcage just below her left breast, not deep enough to catch the lung, thank God, but deep enough to hurt with a sharp clarity that made her vision sharpen into tunnel focus. Blood soaked through her scrubs now, visible and real, but her hands were already moving, already disarming him with a textbook combatives technique that no civilian nurse should have known, her body executing movements her conscious mind had buried for 7 years. Wrist lock. Rotational pressure. The blade fell. The attacker fell. His arm folded behind his back like origami. The room exploded into chaos. Alarms shrieked. The general's monitor spiked. But Elena's vision had narrowed to one problem: the attacker's forearm was moving toward his mouth, toward his teeth, toward a possibility she recognized from classified briefings about suicide protocol in detainee situations. She grabbed the four-tubing from the standard saline line, strong enough, and zip-tied his wrists before he could process what was happening. One twist. Tight. Professional. Her hands were shaking now, but not from fear. From adrenaline. From the knowledge that the hardest part was still coming. She turned to the general. His monitor showed the problem immediately. The struggle had triggered something inside his chest, a cardiac tamponade building behind his ribs like a second heart trying to strangle the first one. His oxygen saturation was dropping. 78%. 74. His jugular vein distended like he was being strangled from the inside. Elena had 30 seconds before full cardiovascular collapse. She didn't reach for the phone. Didn't wait for the attending. She was already moving toward the crash cart, her left shoulder screaming, her ribs ablaze, her hands reaching for what she needed like a pianist reaching for keys she'd practiced 1,000 times. The needle was a 14-gauge angiocath, and the space was the 5th intercostal, just beneath the xiphoid process where the cartilage ended and the soft abdomen began. She'd done this procedure exactly 4 times in her life, all of them in combat situations, all of them in the dark or under fire. Here, under fluorescent lights, with a proper patient and proper supplies, it should have felt easier. It didn't. Her shoulder wound pulled as she positioned herself, and the pain tried to take her focus. She made it information again. Just data. The needle advanced through the chest wall with a sensation like puncturing leather, and then the moment of entry into the pericardial sac. Dark blood flooded back through the needle hub. The hiss of pressure equalizing. The general's oxygen saturation climbed. 81. 87. 92. The monitor's rhythm steadied from chaotic to something almost normal. Dr. Caldwell arrived then, moving with the smooth authority of someone who'd never had to question their right to be in a room. He took in the scene in 2 seconds, the sedated attacker zip-tied with foot tubing, the procedure tray, Elena's blood-soaked scrubs, and his expression shifted into something that looked like pity mixed with calculation. He gave orders. Good orders. She'd give him that. The attacker was sedated and restrained. The general was transferred to cardiac surgery for a proper evaluation. Elena was told to go to the emergency department for wound closure. All very professional. All very controlled. But in the ER bay, while a resident sutured the shoulder laceration with Elena sitting shirtless on a paper-covered stretcher, the phone call started. She heard about them later, the cascade of information that moved through the hospital's nervous system like poison through water. Dr. Caldwell had a gift for narrative. The way he told it, Elena wasn't a nurse who'd instinctively protected a patient. She was an unstable staff member who'd escalated a psychiatric crisis through excessive force. He called Patricia Yates first, on the board of directors, a woman who owed him a favor for covering a surgical mistake that could have ended her career. He described Elena's violent tendencies and suggested immediate suspension. He called Marcus Chen next, mentioned how Elena had practiced invasive procedures outside her scope of practice, and noted that the hospital's liability exposure could be catastrophic. He told the nursing director that Elena had performed a surgical procedure without physician oversight, potentially violating every credentialing standard the hospital maintained. He filed paperwork. Real paperwork. Official documentation with Elena's signature, her employee number, and recommendations for termination pending investigation. By dawn, the machinery of institutional power had already turned. Elena sat in her car in the parking garage at Seattle General, the concrete ceiling pressing down like a hand on her chest. The engine wouldn't turn over. Battery dead. She'd tried it twice, heard the clicking, felt the absolute finality of a system that simply refused to function. The termination letter lay on the passenger seat, printed on official hospital letterhead, citing patient safety concerns and practicing beyond her nursing scope and the use of force incident that the hospital could not overlook. She pressed her forehead against the steering wheel. Her left shoulder throbbed. Her ribs ached with each breath, sharp and insistent, reminding her that she'd been sliced open and stitched closed in the span of 90 minutes. The old gunshot scars on her forearms, from Marja, from a lifetime ago, seemed to pulse in sympathy, ghost pain from wounds that should have killed her. She'd been erased once before, officially disappeared after the extraction went sideways, ordered never to surface, classified away like she'd never existed at all. Master Chief Petty Officer Martinez was a ghost. A legend in briefing rooms. A name nobody was supposed to speak. And now Elena Martinez was disappearing too. Fired. Erased again. Twice in one life was supposed to be the maximum. Twice was supposed to be mercy. She reached for the ignition. Tried again. The clicking sound echoed in the concrete tomb of the garage, mechanical and mocking, like the hospital itself was telling her something. She sat with her hands on the wheel and simply waited for the morning light to reach the lower levels, unable to move, unable to think past the fact that everything she'd rebuilt was collapsing into the same kind of nothing she'd already survived once. The machinery had changed its teeth, and now it was grinding her to dust. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that she'd done everything right, and it hadn't mattered at all. The psychiatric ward was quiet at 3 in the morning. Elena sat in the break room nursing cold coffee when the monitors went wild down the hall, a single sustained shriek that cut through fluorescent silence like a blade through tissue. She moved before thinking. Her body knew what her mind was still processing. The refugee patient, the one who'd screamed in Pashto, the one she'd disarmed with techniques that shouldn't exist in a civilian nurse's muscle memory, was thrashing against soft restraints, eyes wide and feral, his voice raw with terror and recognition. Phantom! 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 Her battlefield call sign. The one that existed only in classified files 7 layers deep. The one buried under redaction and official erasure. The night shift nurse was backing away, palm pressed to her chest. Elena moved past her with the fluid precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before, not in hospitals, but in forward operating bases where screaming men meant infected wounds or memories worse than any infection. She reached the bedside in 3 steps. Muscle memory took over. Her hand pressed against his shoulder, firm, grounding, the kind of touch that said authority without violence. I'm here. You're safe. You're in America. His eyes locked on her face and something shifted in his expression. Recognition. Not of her features, but of the presence. The calm that came from having already survived the worst. Within minutes, the panic dissolved into confused whimpering. She stayed until his breathing steadied, her hand on his shoulder, and then she stepped back into the hallway where the veteran security guard, Marcus Chen, 32 years on the force, Marine Corps before that, Fallujah first rotation, was standing motionless outside the door. Marcus was staring at her with the expression of a man watching a ghost materialize in scrubs. That call sign, he said quietly. That's not a medical term. Elena didn't answer. Didn't move. The break room coffee still in her hand, cooling by the second. Phantom. Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. You're Master Chief Petty Officer Martinez. You're the one they said was. He stopped. His jaw worked silently. You carried Lieutenant Colonel Graves 3 miles through the Sanjin Valley minefield while returning suppressive fire. That's not just in unit history. That's... He trailed off, understanding finally why her presence in Marja had been classified, why his old unit had been ordered never to speak her name outside of secure networks. Elena set the coffee cup on the nearest cart. Her voice, when it came, carried an octave she hadn't used in 7 years, flat, authoritative, the voice of someone accustomed to command. The patient needs sleep. Yes, Marcus said automatically. And then, you didn't flinch when he stabbed you. Combat assessment. He was 140 pounds, untrained. No defensive stance. She paused. I've handled worse. The general's room was 3 doors down. Elena found him awake, heart monitor displaying the steady rhythm of recovery, his eyes tracking the 4 lines with military precision, someone trained to calculate threats and resources. The moment she entered, his gaze shifted to her face. She approached the bedside with her hands visible. A courtesy. A protocol. Your vitals are stable, she said. How's the pain? Manageable. He studied her with the focused intensity of someone whose survival had depended on reading people. You were the one. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer, but she didn't leave either. The general reached for the metal table beside his bed, fumbling one-handed through his personal effects until he found the thin folder, his personnel file, the one that had been delivered to his room that morning. His hands were steady as he opened it, reading the redacted document with the comprehension of someone who understood that black ink meant classified operations, means erased records, meant soldiers who officially didn't exist. 10 seconds of silence. He looked at his own forearm, at the tattoo that read Martinez beneath a date that corresponded to Marja, a date he'd thought would be his last day alive. His fingers traced the inked letters. "Carried me 3 miles, he said quietly. 2 privates too. Through a minefield. While the Taliban had overwatch." He looked up at her. "You were bleeding when you handed me the challenge coin. I thought the morphine was making me hallucinate that part. A nurse who moved like..." He stopped. "Who moved like what you are?" Elena's jaw tightened. A fraction. A pause. But nothing more. The general's hand moved to his chest, where his dog tags caught the fluorescent light. With deliberate care, he reached beneath his hospital gown and withdrew something that had been taped against his skin, a single tarnished coin, brass dulled with age and use, the kind of challenge coin that could be cashed in for a drink or a promise or a life. He held it toward her. 7 years ago, he said, a Master Chief pressed this into my hand in the back of a Black Hawk while checking my arterial bleeds. Told me to come back and find her when this was over. Told me she'd buy the first round." Elena took the coin. Her hand was steady. Her breathing was steady. The trembling wasn't fear. It was restraint. The immense control required not to let anyone see what it meant, to be found after 7 years of erasure, to be named by someone whose memories were more reliable than government records. That night, the general continued, "Your hand was on my femoral artery and you were talking to me in a voice so calm it made me believe we were both going to make it. You never told me your name. I asked twice. You said it didn't matter. That we'd either both walk out or it wouldn't make a difference." Elena turned the coin over in her palm. The surface was smooth from handling, worn in places where fingers had gripped it 1,000 times. "Sit," the general said. It wasn't a request. She sat in the vinyl chair beside his bed, the one visitors used during daylight hours. The chair was cold against the back of her thighs. The general reached out his good arm and grasped her hand, the one holding the coin, and then, with the deliberate gravity of someone performing a ritual that transcended ranks and uniforms, he lowered himself forward, inch by inch, until his forehead touched the back of her hand. A kneeling man. A general kneeling before a nurse in a hospital room in San Diego while machines beeped steady rhythm and fluorescent lights hummed their white noise hymn. Elena's breath caught. Once. The only tell. The only thing she couldn't control. When he sat back, his eyes were wet. "Welcome home, Master Chief." The video made it to Dr. Gerald Haynes's phone by noon the next day. For million views already, a general kneeling before a woman in scrubs, the caption reading, "Military Officer Honors Decorated Master Chief Who Saved His Life." Hashtags proliferated, #not just a nurse, #hidden hero, #phantom who saved us. Haynes was 73, retired Navy, spent 30 years in military medicine before moving to academic leadership. He watched the video 3 times, then scrolled backward through the comments until someone linked the hospital cafeteria footage from the week prior, timestamp verified, sourced from the hospital's own security archives. Dr. Caldwell mocking a woman with meticulous hands. Outdated protocols, inefficient, waste of hospital resources. The woman who stood quietly, not trembling, not crying, not defending herself. Just absorbing the contempt like it was part of her job description. Dr. Haynes had trained thousands of doctors. He knew the difference between confidence and cruelty, between critique and contempt. He knew what he was watching. He made 3 phone calls. The first was to the hospital's chief medical officer. "I need your supply chain audit for Dr. Caldwell's surgical authorizations. The last 18 months. I'm going to send you a video, and then you're going to look at those numbers with fresh eyes, and then you're going to call your compliance officer." The second was to a contact in Naval Criminal Investigative Service. "I have a civilian doctor who appears to have been actively sabotaging a decorated Master Chief petty officer whose service was classified. That Master Chief saved a general's life. If there are any active investigations into hospital billing fraud, this name should be included." The third was to the State Medical Board. "I'd like to file a complaint regarding a physician's conduct. Also, I have evidence of a systematic supply ordering scheme that doesn't add up. By evening, the hospital's board convened an emergency session. The supply chain director presented spreadsheets. Ghost billings. Equipment orders that never arrived. Reimbursements traced back to a distributor whose owner was now claiming he only sent payments to Caldwell per his requests and had no idea what the authorization process was supposed to be. Patricia Yates and Marcus Chen, board members Caldwell had called in favors from, were already distancing themselves. One email arrived from Patricia's lawyer stating that Dr. Caldwell had misrepresented the facts regarding a personnel matter and that the board was withdrawing any support previously offered. By Friday, Caldwell's termination letter was on his desk. For cause: 14 weeks of severance. 0 pension benefits. His medical license suspended pending state investigation. His malpractice insurance had already dropped him after the NCIS inquiry landed in their inbox. The email that followed his termination came from his distributor contact, copying everyone. Dr. Caldwell initiated all supply ordering through falsified requisitions. I have been maintaining records per standard business practice and am cooperating fully with state investigators. 6 weeks later, Dr. Marcus Wendell Caldwell, who had once commanded rounds with the confidence of a man who believed the title doctor granted him dominion over everyone around him, stood in front of a plastic CPR dummy at Mercy Community College's Health Sciences building. The dummy's chest bore the scuff marks of 300 compressions. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A dozen students, none of them knowing his name, watched with the polite indifference of people attending a mandatory certification class. Hand position matters, Caldwell said, his voice hollow in a way that had nothing to do with medical instruction. Compressions need to be at least 2 inches deep. He pressed down on the dummy's sternum. The click-click-click of proper rhythm. The mechanical perfection of resuscitation without consequence, without failure, without the weight of knowing that you destroyed someone's career to save your own. $15 an hour. No benefits until after 90 days. Health insurance through a marketplace plan that cost more than his first apartment rent. One student raised his hand. "Are you certified to teach this?" "Yes," Caldwell answered. Another demonstration compression. Another plastic breath. "I'm certified." He didn't mention the hospitals. Didn't mention the rank. Didn't mention the scandal that had made regional headlines and was now slowly fading into the background noise of medical politics where scandals went to die. 2 weeks later, Elena Martinez stood in a private Pentagon ceremony room wearing dress whites for the first time in 7 years. The fabric felt foreign on her skin, crisp, formal, the uniform of a version of herself that had been officially erased and was now, by executive order, being reassembled. The general stood beside her. Still recovering. Still bearing the marks of the blade. But upright. A vice admiral she'd never met opened a leather case containing commendations. Each medal had been earned in a classified operation that would remain classified. Each metal badge represented a moment that officially never happened. Bronze Star with Valor for exceptional leadership under fire. The weight of it pinned against her dress whites. Purple Heart for combat injuries sustained during Operation Enduring Freedom, Helm and Province. Another weight. Another moment that had to be hidden to be acknowledged. Purple Heart, second award. The general's hand found her shoulder. Steady. Grounding. Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in the face of enemy fire while executing a non-combatant extraction in hostile territory. The highest. The last. The one that made her visible again because finally, someone in power had decided that some secrets were worth breaking to restore the truth. Master Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez, the Vice Admiral said, and her name, her real name, in her real rank, spoken aloud in an official capacity, hung in the air like something sacred. Welcome home. Seattle General offered her reinstatement within 24 hours. Clinical nurse educator position. 40% raise. The condition was hers. She would train every new nurse in what she called combat-level emergency protocol, the kind of thinking that existed in the space between textbooks and reality, where a person's training had to override their fear. She accepted. On her first day back, residents and nurses stopped her in the corridors. Some had seen the videos. Some had read about the scandal. All of them moved with the careful respect of people who had learned, perhaps too late, perhaps just in time, that the quietest people in a room were sometimes the ones holding everything together. The general returned monthly for follow-up cardiac appointments. He always requested Elena as his nurse. Each visit, his hand would move to the challenge coin now hanging openly on a chain beneath his uniform shirt, and he would touch it like a talisman, like a prayer, like a promise fulfilled. Elena kept her duplicate in her locker. The matching tarnished coin. Beside it, a photo from the Pentagon ceremony, her in dress whites, the general in his full uniform, the vice admiral shaking her hand. During a teaching session with new nurses, one of them asked how Elena had stayed so calm during the attack. Elena considered the question. The room was quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed their unchanging frequency. The ones who have seen the worst, she said quietly, often give the most. The young nurses didn't fully understand. But they would. Eventually, they would understand that this quiet woman with steady hands had survived 7 years of erasure, had absorbed contempt without breaking, had moved through her own disappearance like someone who'd already learned that the deepest strength exists in the spaces where no one is watching. If you found Elena's story moving, subscribe to see more tales of hidden heroes recognized. Like this video if you believe the quiet ones deserve their spotlight. And comment, have you ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your true strength?